All right. You know what people aren't appreciating, though, guys, is the movie Snow White, the live action remake. And apparently, it's not doing too well. And since we have a box
Weird,
office,
weird.
yeah, since we have a box office expert with the All Father himself on the panel, I wanted to get your take. So basically, Odin, Variety is reporting that Snow White has made $3.5 million in previews, and they also, all the industry trades basically said that, oh, everyone was wrong about this movie. It's so good. Rachel Zegler is spectacular, blah, blah, blah. And that they could be looking at $100 million worldwide box office gross at the end of this weekend. So, what's the truth behind these box office numbers, Odin, if you want to fill us in?
Oh, I mean, it very well could make $100 million worldwide. However, that's a terrible number. Like the fact that they're trying to run with that as being somehow a big win for the movie is a bit egregious, especially since, hey, they weren't willing to admit the truth when it came to the budget for Captain America Brave New World, but they are willing to say, yeah, the reported budget on this movie is around $270 million. And just to give you a bit of context, right, we expect it to likely have maybe even cost a little bit more. And we're going to find out the full cost of this as time goes on, because they filmed it in the UK to take advantage of those tax credits. And so eventually those numbers do come out. We actually got early numbers that were reported by Caroline Reed over at Forbes. And so that's how we know it's cost about as much as it has already. So $100 million is on the table for the entire worldwide opening weekend. But to hopefully give a little bit of context on that, you know, Mufasa, The Lion King, opened $125 million globally in its opening weekend. So this would be underneath that. Now, Mufasa did leg out to get to upwards of $700 million, but that was also barely making a bit of a profit because of, again, the massive budget that movie had going for it. Wicked opened to 162 million. Venom 3 opened to 175 globally. Even Joker 2 opened to 121 million globally. Alien Romulus, $108 million globally. So they can try to throw out $100 million and act like that's somehow supposed to be impressive. But if you just compare that to some other films, and a few of them actually were massive flops, with the kind of budget that this movie has, yeah, this is not good news for them really at all. And they're also kind of, you know, leaving a bit of context out, because Deadline has a report right now where they're like, it's right now tracking to have the same opening weekend as Dumbo. The issue is that Dumbo is also one of the biggest failures when it comes to the live action adaptations that they have ever done. That film was a box office loser, only made 2.1 times its budget back.
It's also a decade old too, right?
Yes. And so it's kind of crazy. Actually, I was looking into that. I think it came out in 2019, actually. So it actually came out like at the peak of box office at that time, because it was right before COVID. Things were looking pretty good. And even that film, though, Dumbo, was not able to get a lot of people out there. It was because of the darker tone, the darker themes. Families just did not want to go see it. They're like, I'm not bringing my kids to this. This looks like a creepy Tim Burton thing. And, sure enough, it seemed like that was indeed the case. Yeah, this is, I think, a situation where this movie is probably going to do about as well as Dumbo did. So we're talking about $350 to $400-ish million globally by the end of its run. And yeah, that means that we're talking about probably $150, $200 million in financial losses for this movie. So things are not going well. And I don't know why people like Tony at Deadline continue just to try to shill for these movies and try to paint the most pretty picture they possibly can for these films. And even when they're mentioning another movie that should be a sign of a failure, like Dumbo, they're trying to say, hey, it's doing better than that one. It's ridiculous.
Disney knew this was going to be a bomb, right? I mean, the way this has been set up over the last couple of years. Well,
they were already
Zegler's mouth.
Yeah, they were prepping for it.
They had to have just like, let's just get this thing out and done and over with, so we can move on to whatever our next phase of
Thursday morning. They were dropping Stitch posters. It's like, don't you have a big movie opening? Yeah, in a month or two they do. They're moving past this because they knew. Just to kind of put this in perspective, Little Mermaid, which ended up making just over $500 million, I think it was, that opened at 10.5 million in previews. Snow White did 3.5 million.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, Odin's pretty much right. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if it even goes lower than that. Yeah. I was thinking now with this kind of opening, we're looking at like the 275 range, maybe.
And the only reason I'm not going that low is because never count out the female demographic. Because they when it comes to like Mufasa, for instance, there's no reason that film should have gotten $700 million. Like that movie was not good in any way, and yet it legged out. It's because we know, Disney oftentimes puts vice scripts on the theaters by saying, "Oh, you want our movie? You want to have some box office? Well, guess what? If you want to have it, you have to have X amount of 3D showings, X amount of IMAX showings. If you don't have this exact thing, you don't get our movie." That's basically what they do, and something that a lot of studios do, but they are the most egregious. I remember when I worked in a theater in New Orleans, I knew of a single theater called the Britannia, beautiful historic theater down in New Orleans, and the Britannia only has a single screen, and so whenever they would get a Disney movie, they were basically forced to not have any promotion for any other movie showing at the same time as long as they had that movie, or at least for the first 2 weeks that they had that movie. And so they oftentimes had to like go under the radar and say, we're actually having a midnight showing of another movie, because they couldn't really promote anything else.
It seems like these theaters, like Major Chai Chai's chat in their kind of highlights, they could put almost anything up against these Disney movies and probably sell just as many tickets these days, because these Disney movies are so stupid. It feels like they're just money grabs. They're just stupid remakes of things that were popular already, and they have to like redo them and put their stupid nonsense into them.
Well, Odin, what I found interesting in both Hollywood Reporter and Variety's kind of like take on this is when they call back with Little Mermaid and Dumbo and stuff like that, they're always qualifying that by saying not adjusted for inflation.
Mm-hmm.
And you like to point out that inflation actually plays a big role in these box office numbers, but that actually means the greater the inflation, the less tickets are sold.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Right. And that's the thing, like no matter which way you do it, because some people also hate whenever I bring up inflation, they get triggered by it. And I'm always just like, stay triggered, guys, because I'm going to keep on bringing it up.
Yeah.
Because, sometimes they make a good point to say, well, it's better if you just look at the ticket sales because that's more accurate. It's like, okay, I think both show the same thing, though. And you really end up seeing that. Whether you're comparing the total global box office or even just the domestic box office of a film from a different era, from a different time, if you are comparing them and then adjusting for inflation, guess what? The value of the dollar was worth a lot more back 20, 30 years ago than it is today. I mean, that's a surprise to some people, but hey, that's the truth. And so you also, though, you could look at it from tickets were only $5 at this point in time. Tickets were only $2 at this point in time. Well, guess what? That means that a $200 million movie making $200 million right back at a certain time for $2 a ticket, that's a lot of people going to see that movie. Whereas if you have $200 million made today, but it's $13 to $15 per ticket, guess what? That's very little. That's very few people in comparison going to it.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's insane that, and that's why, again, I always like to make fun of Tony, because Tony loves to bring up saying, oh, it's going to have the same weekend as Dumbo. It's like, no, Dumbo was made back in 2019. Not only has inflation happened, but ticket prices have changed, right? Because of that. So whether you're looking at one or the other, guess what? If it's making the same as Dumbo, it's making less.
Well, and the thing with ticket prices is the inflation on ticket prices is almost worse than gas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you think about it, because we went from when we were young kids, like it would cost you $3 to $5 tops to get into a theater. And we're talking when you're talking $5, you're talking like big cities in most cases.
Mm-hmm.
By the time you get to the 90s,
minimum wage back when I was a kid was $3.35, and tickets were like $4, $3.50 to get into the movie. So
I usually spent like $3 a ticket, $3.75 somewhere in that region. You get into the 90s, that's when it started jumping up to $5-7 a ticket on average, then $7 to $10 on average.
Mm-hmm.
Now, just to go to a theater near me, I'm looking at spending easily $30 just to get one seat because you can't just go buy a ticket anymore, right? Because the people look at you funny when you do that too. They're like, well, you didn't go buy it online, but you can go over there and do it on the app. Because you know what they do? They get that convenience fee on top of it all.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time it's all said and done, it's like $27.99 just to go see a movie now. And that's before popcorn, before the popcorn bucket, for anything extra. And God forbid you're going to see an IMAX film. Then you're looking at the 30s, 40s plus just for one ticket in some cases.
And why do
it's
that
ridiculous.
when it's going to be on, Peacock Network in 2 weeks?
No,
anyway.
but the whole thing, that Odin's saying, though, is true, because this idea that all these movies are making bunch of money, it's like, yeah, they're doing great. Sure, Avengers, a lot of people went to see Endgame, but did nearly as many people go see Endgame as went to see the original Star Wars or Jaws or Exorcist or even Gone with the Wind for that matter? Because if we still go by actual tickets sold, I still think Gone with the Wind is by
Yeah.
far
Yeah.
the winners. So like even Star Wars is like what, 4th or 5th in line, I think, behind a bunch of other things. So like yeah.
I gotta go look.
And to give context, like the last bit of context here, because we've been mentioning a lot of things. So they mentioned Dumbo. Okay. So if this film, Snow White, makes $45 million this weekend, that's just the domestic number, right? Dumbo, if you adjust for inflation, made $56 million in its opening weekend. So again, for Tony to say, oh, it's doing the exact same, it's like, no, actually, when you adjust, Dumbo had a $10 million, $11 million advantage up against the $45 million being projected here. For context, Little Mermaid made $98 million when you adjust. The Cinderella live action from 2015 made $91 million, and Mufasa Lion King made $35. So this is an opening between Mufasa and Dumbo, and people are going to say, oh, but it could leg out like Mufasa. Again, it could happen. The female demographic and bringing the Dotties to the theater, like that could absolutely be the case. But because of the stank on this movie, it reminds me a lot of the stank on Dumbo, more so than the stank on Mufasa.
Well, also, Odin, because of Rachel Zegler and her comments and her outspokenness, a lot of conservative mothers. Sorry, that's my neighbor with the motorcycle.
You live next door to Batman and he's got a jet?
I live next door to the Hells Angels is what I live next door to. Yeah, so the thing here is that they basically cut their female demographic audience in half, essentially, because no conservative mother wants to take their kids to see, to support Rachel Zegler, basically. But Brian, one of the interesting things leading up to this weekend was that for early previews and stuff like that, people were going online and taking pictures of these empty theaters. They were showing what seats had been sold on the online apps and stuff like that. And basically, Newsweek made an entire article going through some of this stuff. And we got our friend Chrissy Mayer on here. It's like Saturday night, 7:30 p.m., 0 tickets sold. Snow White is DOA. And that's just one of many kind of anecdotal tales about empty theaters for this movie. What do you think that means for the overall box office of Snow White?
I mean, we'll see more when we get to. I mean, I'm not sure how long it's going to run, but there is spring break coming up for kids, and so we might see more theater visits from families when they have a lot more time. It's funny. This movie, if it came out 2 weeks prior, would have gotten. They would have been competing with themselves. So they couldn't do that. But usually the movies come out around some kind of 4-day weekend or something.
Well, this was spring break for all the kids out there. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we have our spring break this week. So.
I see. Oh, so spring break for me is in a week.
Easter break is a different thing. If you're thinking of Easter break,
perhaps Easter. Yeah, I mean it could. I watched the movie. It's not good or bad. It's sort of, it's bad because you could have made it good. It's like a classic story. You could have made a really good movie here, and it's just sort of whatever. Rachel's Zegler is not the right choice. Good singer, not the right choice.
I heard it ends with a Diddy party.
I love Gal Gadot, but that's not the right choice. Everything, you have bad choices for the characters. Bad choices. It feels like it's 2 movies in one. There's a lot of weird things about the movie that don't make sense. It could have been a really good movie. You could have just retold the story you already told. The one that everyone loves. I don't know why you thought all your other live action movies are pretty much retellings of the original movie. But this one, you took a weird detour halfway through. I don't understand it. I'm sure it has something to do with the message or some kind of agenda-driven writing. I can't tell you why. But it doesn't mean that it's totally DOA. I mean, I guess if spring break is happening, it's still dead. I still think there's some time for it to get some play. But who knows?
I was just looking at my local theater, the one we all go to around here, for today's 4:00 showing, which I feel like is prime time for taking your kids to a movie, because it's right before it's still on the matinee prices, right? There's 12 tickets have been sold to the 4:00 show at this galaxy
And
theater here.
that's all I've
So,
seen all week is
yeah.
empty theaters, screens where people are at the screenings where they're the only one in the screenings.
Mm-hmm.
Because Odin's right, because Disney will come in and make a theater, especially depending on how many screens you have. You have to have so many screens of that, and it's like, this is not going to set well for the next time around, other than Lilo and Stitch, when they're like, well, you're going to have to take this movie for X amount, and they're like, well, we're not going to do it.
Yeah, I think
So that's what's going to happen.
I think that movie's going to do fairly well.
That's the only one I think that they have any confidence in right now that is going to do well. That comes out at the end of May. I think we've got one other big movie between now and then, which I think is the Thunderbolt. So they're like basically keep competing with themselves throughout this time.
Is that a
period.
big
Technically,
movie?
Minecraft comes out April 4th.
Nobody
So
cares
that would
about
be
Minecraft.
competition for the same, but like
Yeah,
younger
but-
audience.
yeah.
Like that's the.
You know what's going to be funny?
competition.
Oh, I just said that, and Minecraft will end up outgrossing Snow White.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, it
probably.
will.
It will.
hilarious.
It'll end up making like
Yeah.
$400, $500, $600 million, and Snow White, like I said, will make like 275 somewhere
Dutch.
in there. Yeah.
Dutch, I wanted to ask you, what role do you think Rachel Zegler has played in this boondoggle for Disney?
Oh, I think she's probably cost them at least $50 million in if not more. I mean, she's just a kind of a repulsive, repugnant little twerp. I mean, there's nothing about her that makes me want to go, oh, I'm going to go buy a ticket. She's like there with Zendaya. It's like, oh, I mean, I'd rather go watch a Zendaya movie, to be perfectly honest with you, than a Rachel Zegler movie. So yeah.
Don't you even try to compare them. How dare you, Dutch?
I know, man. And I'm the world's biggest Zendaya defender.
Dutch,
so
did you see the meme about Rachel Zegler's back hair?
I did. Well, I kind of like the little girl hairs on the back of her back because they're soft. You
didn't meet your wife on no camping trip. Your
The way
wife's
you
a
said that
Bigfoot,
was
isn't
also
she,
the
Gus?
weirdest thing. Gosh.
Like
Shave the bitch down and you taught her to speak.
little soft hairs.
She can't speak well, Gus. She's all out there weird.
My buddy
look,
that saw that said, "Look, you've never slept with a Latina if you think that the back hair is."
I don't think
gross.
I don't think that's weird at all.
No, not at all.
In fact, I think it was kind of a weird take. She's got
Yeah.
plenty more things to.
I mean, I think
pick
she
on
bothered us more so in the nerd community. I think the
Little
thing that
fuzz.
hit the mainstream that was kind of funny with this whole Snow White thing was Peter Dinklage and the Dwarves.
Yeah,
I think that hit the mainstream a lot more than the Zegler stuff. I mean, yes, it did, and there were people that were turned off by her.
Mhm.
But I mean, even Bill Maher was talking about the dwarf thing like last night on Real Time and whatnot.
Sure.
And I've seen it so many other places where they've had other dwarves have said, this whole thing with Peter Dinklage, basically screwing little people out of roles. And we even vicariously talked to somebody who was gonna go in for an audition, and then they got a phone call saying not to bother right after the Peter Dinklage come out publicly and said that. So it's not like Disney wasn't going to have. I think they were going to have little people do the motion capture for the dwarves, right? Because as I've always stated, the dwarves were always going to be in the movie. They were just going to be different. They were going to be the magical creatures, which they ended up being, or whatever. In the
Anyone
end,
else
so.
find it ironic that in order to promote diversity, Disney did less diversity in the movie?
I don't think
Well,
I don't think they see little people as diverse.
No.
Yeah, they're like equivalent with Asians to Hollywood, right? Like they aren't technically
Right.
like a different race, I guess. But Tom, I wanted to ask you real quick. So before the movie came out with its closed premiere, you saw this big blitz in legacy media talking about how wonderful this movie was and how great Rachel Zegler was. And online, everyone was saying like, oh, the haters are going to be mad because this movie is actually good. What was your take on the shill media basically trying their hardest to help this movie open?
I think that was Disney pushing the idea that we really have to sell this movie, and the thing that they knew was a big problem besides the dwarves was her and a little angry dwarf named Rachel Zegler. And they were going as far as throwing Gal Gadot under the bus, right? Like, look, I get it. I don't like it when actors get into politics, but Gal Gadot actually has something to say about this. She was in the Israeli military. This is where she comes from. She has, her opinion. She's finally speaking out on it. It's been a while and she's been silent. And yet they tried to equate that with what Rachel Zegler's done. It's like, no. Last time I checked, this bitch wasn't from Palestine. right? Like, what the hell does she have to do with anything going on over there? And the fact that you have her pinned against your other main star is not a good look for a movie at all.
Right.
It's not. You know, it would be like if in reality, like in Rocky IV, like Ivan Drago was really a Russian at the time. Like how that would have worked out in reality. Like it just would have been kind of, you know, awkward for everybody. But even that wouldn't have been as bad as this. Like this is really bad because you even have these two going tit for tat a little bit here and there. Like, and it was more or less Zegler who was taking pot shots more than anything, and they're low key bullshit. And it's stuff that everybody was picking up on, and they saw how they were kind of like, you could tell they were not in tune at all at the Oscars, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so that is a big problem. The movie itself was one that nobody ever asked for. I always knew it was going to do worse than Little Mermaid because Little Mermaid is one of their biggest franchises, right? Like, there's a few things that I know about Disney, and that is the three things that always sell are Little Mermaid, Stitch, and Cars.
Mhm.
That's one thing that I'm always told, and Snow White is probably nowhere even near that. Like, and I even pointed it out the other day, and Odin will back me up on this. Snow White has been released 3 times in the last 20 years. Once on DVD, once on Blu-ray, and once on 4K. You know how many times Little Mermaid has been released? At least 5. They did like 1 or 2 DVDs. They did the regular Blu-ray, the 3D Blu-ray, and now the 4K Blu-ray. Right? So like that has had multiple releases compared to like Snow White, where it's there, it gets noticed because it's the first, but that's probably the only reason it still does. It's very quaint by compared to the other Disney films.
Tom, maybe you can relate to this. To me, you know, I'm 55, okay? And even to me, Snow White, when I was a kid, was that scary ass Disney movie that was put out 100 years ago. You know, it's like we all knew it was their first one, but it was just, I never really.
It's the only Disney movie that feels like it was made when it was made. That's what you're getting at, Dutch. It's like,
I guess so.
It does feel like it was made in the 1930s. Like you watch Snow White now, and it definitely feels that way compared to Pinocchio, which was only made a couple years later.
Right.
And stuff like that. So like, yeah.
It never really felt like I something I needed to like see again or have remade, or
the music
or
feels very
like,
1930s as well.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
Dutch,
honestly, that movie scared the shit out of me, to be perfectly honest with you. The witch was terrifying, and it's just, I don't know. It's like Bambi. I never really had a connection with these movies like I had with like The Fox and the Hound, or Robin Hood, or you know, and even, you know, or the Jungle Book. And even the Jungle Book was like before my time. I think it was made in the 50s or something, right? So
Sword in the Stone.
yeah, those are
So you like
great
the
movies.
latter Disney stuff, basically.
I guess so. I guess that's just more my generational stuff. And that's why I can't see why anybody with like a little kid or a little girl or whoever why they would even care or be interested in going to see a modern telling of a 130-year-old movie. You know,
I mean,
just,
Wicked is based on a product that came out originally. What the books came out in the early 1900s, late 1800s, and the first movie was you know, not the first movie, but the one that we associate as being the first.
I mean,
movie,
it made more sense to me that they redid, you know, like Little Mermaid. Little Mermaid were my kids' movie. You know, my daughters grew up wanting to be like Ariel, especially my redheaded one. You know, but they had no connection to Snow White. Yeah, I mean, it's just like, it seemed like a weird thing to do.